My name is Jada, and this is my story. My parents divorced when I was 4 years old. When I would go to my dad's house, I was constantly being asked what was going on at my mom's house. And all I was wanting was to feel the love from my parents and not be pulled in each direction. It really put a hole that wasn't being filled with, the love for my mom or the love for my dad. It was just me feeling like I wasn't good enough for them. When stuff like that was going on, I was turning to, alcohol or drugs or one-night stands to fill that hole that I didn't have from my parents. I wanted to turn to the substance abuse because that's all I knew. The drugs was to make me forget everything, and then the promiscuous was just to make me not feel nothing. All those things continued up until I was about 18 or 19. I ended up marrying someone that was a few years older than me, and he joined the military. So I was 19 when I got married. Got moved away from all my family and friends, anything that I knew, because I thought that this was the kind of love that I needed. I had my daughter when I was 20, so I was still a baby myself, trying to raise a baby, and here I am still not having any type of love that I had been searching for my whole life. He ended up having an affair, and I got all this via email that he didn't want me or my daughter there when he got home. Then I spiraled again into really bad depression, more alcohol, more drugs, more one-night stands, still trying to fill that void and looking for it obviously in all the wrong places. In 2005, I met my now husband and started to fill some of that void, but I could tell something was still missing. I was battling with depression and suicidal thoughts and had the suicide, how I would do it, all planned out, just never actually did it. I figured I needed to do something to try to fix all of these things, and my kids started asking more about God and Jesus, and so we started coming to Christ Church. Myself and my youngest were saved and baptized at the same time. I think with everything that I've learned over the past few years and with a lot of the healing, and I would say that I now know that, like I said, I don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect and healed and complete to come to God and surrender everything to Him and let Him be the ultimate Father. My Heavenly Father is so much more than my earthly father ever could be.
Hey, how's everybody doing? I was just shocked because the first service applauded, but you missed your chance, so it was just like, okay, well, I thought it was a good story. Hey, I've heard a lot of stories lately, and I think every time we hear one, it gives us the courage to tell our own. And so many people are starting to share in the last few weeks about what they're experiencing and what they're going through, and I just like hearing Jada's story because it just reminds me that we're not all going through the same thing, but we're all going through something. And so I'm glad you're here today and what we're going to talk about together. Next week, I just want to give you a heads up, and I did this last week. We're going to spend the whole day talking about self-harm and suicide. And then the week after that, which is Mother's Day, I have confirmation that my special guest is definitely going to join me, which is my wife. And so Chris is going to come out and do that. She's already a little anxious, so don't add to it. And what we're going to do is, I think we're probably going to end up touching on everything we've already talked about so far, but we're just going to be able to share our story and maybe how we've experienced most everything in our own family. And so one of the things I want to do is I want to give you the opportunity to ask a question. So we put this QR code up here. You can scan it, just submit a question. And we don't have all the answers, but we have had a majority of the experiences. And so a lot of the questions I've gotten in the last couple of weeks have been related to, are we going to talk about how to maybe walk through this with a family member? And so that's what we're going to try to do. So if you want to submit a question, we'll just add our perspective to it. And so as we get started today, I want to go back to week number 1, because what we started there laid the foundation for everything. And I just want to walk through real quickly what we called basically 4 roots. So the weeds we're talking about when it comes to mental health have 4 roots to them. And so the first one is situational, okay? Situational, like life happens, you got a work issue, you got a family circumstance, there's something going on in your life, so it's situational. A second root's biological. All right, this is just kind of like the way we're hardwired. You got a weak heart, I got bad knees. Others of us are predisposed maybe to anxiety and even depression. And then a third one would be clinical, or you might say medical. All right, there's just something going on in your body, right? There's some kind of an imbalance that has to do with your physical being. And then the fourth one's spiritual. All right, so maybe we're not walking closely with God, maybe we're holding on to something, or we're hiding something, or we're actually living out the consequence to a sin, so there's a spiritual root. So when we surveyed our church a couple of weeks back, before we actually jumped into the series, pretty much right at 3 out of 4 of us. So if you want to look around and think you're the one, there's 3 people around you going, okay, 3 out of 4 of us said we're affected in some way by depression. And any number of these roots, I believe, can actually play a part in what we're going to talk about today. So we need to understand, I think, on the front end, that we're talking about a range from what I would consider to be like occasional depression all the way over to here to what I might classify as an ongoing kind of a depression, all right? As a matter of fact, more adults than ever, okay, in history are suffering with depression in some form. And as a result, and I couldn't verify numbers, but millions upon millions of antidepressants being prescribed, right? It's become our second highest volume drug. So again, some depression I would call seasonal. All right, hey, I'm sad. She broke up with me. I didn't get into the college that I wanted to get into. I'm tired. Things are difficult. I'm a Jaguars fan. So there are some things that most of us would say, okay, I'm susceptible to this from time to time. But then over here on the other end, I would say some depression is more what I might call severe. Okay, it's experienced over a long period of time. So I like this description from a Christian author named John Mark Comer, and whenever we throw out a resource to you, that means we would probably recommend it, so you might write that down and go check it out. But John Mark Comer has a book called My Name is Hope, and here's what he says. Depression is when sorrow becomes a way of life. It's not a phase. Okay, when joy, hope, and life are snuffed out of your soul. When you're sad for no reason at all. When no matter how hard you try, fight, and work, you can't pull yourself out of a bad mood. When you wake up sad, and when the day grows worse with each passing hour. When family and friends are distant, when you're tired all the time, when dreams and desires for the future die and all motivation and energy is gone, when life is really, really horrible. We'll talk about this in a couple of weeks, but my wife, Chris, and I think this is what she gave me permission to say, she'll correct me if it's not, I think she can look back many years and talk about this, and I would probably be able to circle a general date on a calendar, go, okay, I remember this time period here, but when you know the right things to do, and you just lack the energy and maybe the willingness to actually do it and to say, okay, yes, I want to be with my family right now, and yes, everybody's out there having fun, and the weather is amazing, and you're having a good time, and life is relatively good, and the family is going relatively well. I want to do it, but I also don't want to do it, and I can't actually do it. And she's not a bad mom. Okay, she's not a bad wife. She's not a bad friend. It's not her introverted personality taking over. She's not a bad Christian. It's depression. So again, over here we're feeling sad, and we can go on with our life, okay? And then way over here, it's like having a thick cloud kind of hanging over us all the time, or it feels like a weight's that's pressing down on us that affects everything, and it just won't let us up. And it's not just an adult thing. Like, I hope we're all aware of that and paying attention, okay? If you actually look back over the last 10 or so years, and I've been doing some reading by a guy by the name of Jonathan Haidt. As a matter of fact, I just started reading one of his books called The Anxious Generation. You should probably write that one down if you're a parent. But he's looking back over the last 10 plus years to say that major depression in teens is up 150%. That anxiety for teens is up 100%. And especially when we start thinking about 18 to 25-year-olds, stuff's going up and to the right. There's been an enormous spike in suicide rates, and then a massive drop in the number of teens who are satisfied with themselves. As a matter of fact, one of the things that he said is that the more time a girl spends on social media, the more likely she is to be depressed or anxious. Depression, okay, just in case you're wondering, I think we ought to say this on the front end, is not a sin. I mean, a number of Bible characters actually struggled through depression. We looked back at the beginning of the year at the life of a guy by the name of Job. Right, you just read through some of the things of what he says, and you go, okay, this guy's struggling here. And as a matter of fact, I think it's probably nearly impossible to go through what I would consider to be a prolonged season of pain without having some depression. A prophet by the name of Jeremiah. How would you like this one on your resume? Wrote an entire book of the Bible called Lamentations. How's that? Actually got the nickname of the weeping prophet. David, who we might be somewhat familiar with in some form, right? He struggled most of his life. He writes about this in the Psalms, okay? Lots of anguish, being downcast in places. He'll actually write about it being a daily thing. So if you struggle with depression, it's probably not a comfort, but you're actually in pretty good company here. So it's not a sin, but don't miss this, it's a sign. Okay, it's not a sin, but it's a sign. It's a signal that something else is going on in my life. It's a warning light, I guess you would say, on the dashboard telling you that something else needs attention right now. So one day I'm driving on probably one of the busiest streets in Raleigh, North Carolina, when I lost all power in my Jeep Grand Cherokee. Now, I've had 2 of these in my life. I've loved them. Any Jeep drivers? Let me tell you why there's not a lot of Jeep drivers in here, because they have problems. And they're weird problems. Anybody? They're very weird problems. Of course, I'm also in the center lane of this busy street. It's about 5 p.m., and the engine cuts out, and the stereo shuts off, and the steering wheel locks up, and there's not one light on the dashboard. So I'm just sitting here. I turn the key, nothing. I turn it 2 more times, still nothing. Now, my wife would like you to know at this point of the story that she had been warning me for a long time to stop driving this vehicle, okay? And true, I'd been experiencing like one problem after another, and then I would fix this problem, and then something else would happen. And, normal stuff like the horn just honking at 2-minute intervals while you're driving down the road. So just average stuff. So now I'm sitting motionless in the middle of this really busy street. Traffic's just kind of whizzing by me, and the standard stuff, they're all telling me I'm number 1, okay? So that's what's happening. So I tightened up my seatbelt, and I said a few carelessly chosen words, and I punched the steering wheel, and I looked down at the dashboard, like, give me any indication of the problem. And I want to show you a picture of what I saw when I looked at the dashboard. It literally, it says done at the bottom. As if my Jeep itself is saying, you know what? I just can't do it anymore. I can't do it. As in, like, stick a fork in me, I'm done. Or, walk away, don't look back, done. Like, throw a match on the whole thing, I'm done. And I go, okay, I'm done too. And I shipped it off to the graveyard is what I did. And I go, I just can't do it anymore. Like, I have no fight left in me. Like, I think I've had enough. And I think if maybe that's how you felt before or how you feel, you're going to connect with today's character, which certainly describes a guy by the name of Elijah. And we're going to read his story, part of it, in 1 Kings chapter 19. And if you're new to the Bible or Bible study, you're never going to find it, and so don't even try. It's going to be on the screen up here. Normally, I would walk you through how to find it, but I don't have that much time today. So 1 Kings chapter 19. And before we get there, you have to know and understand what has happened up to this point in the story, okay? So Elijah is one of the greatest prophets in the history of Israel. Okay, he comes at a time when we've had 19 really, really terrible, evil kings, and the guy who's currently in power is a guy by the name of King Ahab. And it says that he angered God more than anybody before him. And one of the things he did was actually marry a woman by the name of Jezebel, who was actually more evil than he was. So if you're expecting right now, just cross those two names off the list, okay? Those aren't good options. Together, okay, they tried to stamp out basically worship of God in the nation of Israel. They introduced a god by the name of Baal, who's the weather god, and then they began executing some of God's prophets, his spokespeople. So God sends Elijah to confront King Ahab, and the message is, hey, there's not going to be any rain for 3 or more years, okay, until Elijah says another prayer, and I let go of it. But there's not going to be any rain here. And so that brings a famine to the entire country. So shortage of food, shortage of water, we got supply chain issues, economic downturn for years. So fast forward 3+ years, and now they're going to meet up, okay, on top of a mountain where Elijah is challenging 850 false prophets to a spiritual duel, essentially. And here's what they're going to do. All right, you guys build an altar to your God. I'm going to build an altar to my God, and then we're going to pray, and whoever's God answers with fire, then that's going to be the true God, okay? And the other one's probably going to die. So those are kind of like the stakes, okay? So they build the altar, and Elijah lets them go first. Baal, by the way, is literally the god of weather, or specifically rain. And so they pray and they dance and they're doing all kinds of things. They call on their gods and nothing happens. Then Elijah takes his turn, okay, and he actually increases the difficulty, and he's like, hey, I know we're in a water crisis right now, but let's just dump some water around this altar here. And they're dumping water on there, bucket after bucket, which you go, hey, you must feel pretty confident about what's going to happen, because it's a really bad idea when people standing around you are dying of thirst, okay? Elijah prays, God sends fire, it burns the wood, it burns up the altar, it burns up the ground all around it, and it's an amazing victory. Okay, and Elijah orders, okay, seize them, and he executes the false prophets, and God relents on the nation, and he sends rain, and Elijah is so excited. He is so pumped up and full of adrenaline. He's celebrating that he just goes for a jog, and he ends up running 18 miles to a city named Jezreel. So you pick it up in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 1. Ahab goes home, and he tells Jezebel everything that Elijah had done, how he killed all the prophets. So Jezebel sends a message to Elijah. May the gods punish me and do so severely if I don't make your life like the one of them by this time tomorrow. So Elijah wins this amazing victory, right? Ahab loses, he goes home, whines to his wife, and this really scary, evil Jezebel threatens Elijah, saying, look, you got 24 hours and you're a dead man. And in his greatest moment of victory and celebration, someone he doesn't even like at all makes a negative comment. And Elijah became afraid, and he immediately ran for his life. Verse 3 says, he ran to a place called Beersheba, left his servant there, and then went a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree, prayed that he might die. He said, I have had enough. Lord, take my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors. And he lay down and he slept under the broom tree. Now, Elijah's afraid, okay? And he runs to safety, and then geographically he runs a little bit more, and he runs out of gas. So Beersheba is actually the place where God first called him to come and be his messenger, right? And so he goes back really to where it all started, except he leaves his servant behind, and then he walks in alone. So you would say relationally, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, this guy's depleted. How many of you, by the way, know that some of our highest moments in life can actually lead us to some of our lowest feelings? You know that? I think just knowing that as I've gotten older has helped me keep Mondays in perspective. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, what I mean is Sundays around here are amazing. I mean, look at y'all. You're fantastic, right? Most of you are very nice and encouraging, and I'll meet many guests today. You'll introduce me to someone and go, hey, I've been praying for this. This is my one, and they're here. And I go, oh, that's awesome. Glad to meet you. We'll celebrate baptism. I'm going to baptize somebody here at the end of the service, and I'll go home sometimes in the afternoon. I'll sit on the couch, and I don't take naps, so I just think, and I'll go, man, God, you're good. There's just so much to celebrate. And then right before I go to bed, or I'll wake up tomorrow morning and I'll think about a conversation that we had out there, and I'll go, I wonder what they meant by that. Like, why that word and not that word? Why was it a good message and not a great message? Like, what would have taken it from 8 to 10 or 6 to 9? And you'll sit there and you'll think, people didn't really laugh at any of my jokes. And then you just go from there and you go, you know what? I didn't see so-and-so yesterday. Haven't seen them for a while now. I wonder if they've gone somewhere else. I mean, was it something I did? Was it something I said? Was it me? And in 24 hours, I can move from so much to celebrate and be thankful for over to, gosh, why do we have so many problems around here? And I don't think I'm the person for the job. Elijah, the prophet, is battling depression. He's afraid, he's overwhelmed, he's alone, he's stressed, he's burned out, he's exhausted. Even worse, he's suicidal. Now, I'm not sure, and I got another week to figure this out, if he really wants to check out of life entirely, or maybe does he just want to check out of the life that he currently has? And he doesn't see any other way to actually fix things except to end things. I want to give you 4 things from the story, and here's the first one I want to encourage you to do, is to say how you feel. That's it. Say how you feel. When Elijah stops running and before he passes out, he speaks 8 very clear words to God. I have had enough. Lord, take my life. That's how he feels. I mean, it takes a lot of courage, by the way, and some awareness to actually say how you feel. When one of our 3 kids was probably about 16 at the time, they just simply slipped us a note one day, and all it said was, hey, I'm depressed, and I think I need help. It takes a lot of courage just to be able to say that to somebody. And so when you realize that something is not right in your life, right? When you feel like you've maybe lost some motivation, or when you're tired, when you're exhausted, when you're burned out, and maybe even overwhelmed, or when you even have those thoughts, right, that you're not sure you really want your life to go on, don't deny that. That's a feeling, right? Don't keep that to yourself. You need to say to someone that you trust, and maybe even a professional, how you feel. See, Elijah, he can't ignore things anymore without an effect, right? He's tired, he's hungry, he's exhausted, he passes out. Verse 5, and then an angel touched him. And the angel says, get up and eat. And he looked, and there at his head, this is how it is at my house. I don't know about you. I wake up, and there it is, a loaf of bread over hot stones and a jug of water. He ate, he drank, he lay down again. Worse than depression, by the way, is depression when you're hungry and dehydrated. The angel of the Lord came back a second time, touched him. Hey, get up and eat, or the journey will be too much for you. So he got up, ate, and drank. I just want you to notice real quickly that the angels do not tap him on the shoulder and start dropping Bible verses on him in this moment. They're not saying, Elijah, you're not doing very spiritual things right now. They don't start there. I've heard someone say that God treats Elijah like you do a cranky 2-year-old. Here's a Twinkie and some juice. Have a snack and take a nap. And that was pretty funny. Then on the strength, I'll think about it later. Like, why didn't they laugh at that? That was like very funny. I got to work on my delivery. Then on the strength from that food, it says, he walked 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God, entered a cave there and spent the night. And then the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? The second thing I want to encourage you to do is to consider that question that God asks him, and to actually think while you're here. Okay, now geographically, Elijah's traveled, if you look at the map, from the far north end of the country to the far south end. He's completely out of the jurisdiction of Jezebel. And then he goes a little bit further. So like mentally and physically, in addition to that, he's had enough, right? He's ready to quit and he wants to die. But maybe God even asks it metaphorically. Like, what are you doing here? In other words, at this place in your life. When it comes to depression, maybe step one is to say it, but then maybe step two is to think and to actually ask yourself, okay, how did I get here? Now, the amazing thing as human beings, okay, who are wonderful creations of God, is that we have a brain with an emotional center, right? A medial prefrontal cortex that allows us to actually stop and ask why we're feeling the way that we're feeling. Like you can actually stop and go, okay, why am I angry right now? Or why am I afraid? Or why am I stressed about this? And, the science will tell us when you engage that part of your brain and actually your emotion, the rest of your brain has an amazing way of calming down. So that you can just pause for a second and go, okay, what might actually be at the root of how I'm feeling right now? And you might go, you know what? I don't know. I don't know why I feel this way. I just feel off. Or maybe you go, you know what? I think I need to actually see a doctor. And it might take someone. This wouldn't surprise any of you who have heard me talk about this. It might take someone else for you to kind of guide you through this, to prescribe a little something, or to go, okay, something that has been prescribed to you is causing something. Or you might go, you know what? Well, I'm here because I'm disconnected from God. A secret sin is eating away at you. You've been harboring unforgiveness or bitterness in your life. Maybe you need a spiritual guide to help you do a ruthless moral inventory. Maybe you feel this way because of what we talked about last week, right? A trauma in your life. So as I was reading ahead a little bit for next week, I actually came across this book, and here's a picture of it, called Hope Always by a doctor named Matthew Sleeth. And in it, he talks about when his kids were younger, then he and his wife actually would teach them to do a self-assessment on how they're feeling. And they use this acrostic for the word HALT. I'll just run it by you real quickly, and you might be able to use it. He says the H stands for hungry. Just stop and say, hey, am I hungry? Like, is this like a physical need that I have right now? Am I feeling this way because of something physical? Do I need to eat? Maybe you've seen memes or photos, right? I'm sorry for what I said or did when I was hungry. That's what we're talking about here. Because hungry can move to hangry, right? Which is A. A is angry. Hey, someone said something and it made me angry, or there's a situation that's out of my control, or maybe the root of your depression is disappointment, then shows itself as anger. L stands for lonely. Right? When Elijah, this is fascinating to me, finally stopped running, he tells his servant and his companion to stay behind. And then he continues to walk another day into the desert alone. So when he's at his absolute lowest point in his life, he actually walks away from his closest ally. And there's this tendency, I think, for a lot of us when we're dealing with stress and pressure and feelings of depression to further isolate ourselves from people. Okay, rather than move towards them, right, we wall up and we go it alone. And so rather than drawing strength and encouragement and support and counsel from a trusted friend, we tend to isolate ourselves. And listen, in that moment right there, we might be the very last person that we should actually listen to and trust. But getting with people in community, okay, or in a social group, or like, it makes a difference. As a matter of fact, it is the number one proven way for you, community, is faith, or we might call it church. So listen, when we present you with opportunities like to connect and maybe jump into a group and get with some other people, then step into it, because it might be one of the things that you need. Because one of the ways that God actually lifts us up in our life is when other people start to show up and we let them do that. T is tired. Hey, my output has actually exceeded the input. I have no margin, I'm exhausted, and I'm crashing. Now, I know a lot of us who are living under what I would consider to be prolonged stress. Okay, prolonged stress. Like the demands of everything, right? Wearing us down. So we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough patience, we don't have enough of whatever it takes in our life. And we just cannot do one more thing, right? We are just wore out. So let me just merge hungry for a second with tired and say that we absolutely have to care for our bodies because it impacts our minds. Like, I hope you understand that, okay? Like, taking care of the body helps take care of the mind. A lot of us are living on what I would consider to be credit when it comes to sleep. And that might be okay for a short period of time, but you cannot continue to run at a continual deficit, right? It's like your bank account. Like, eventually, you got to pay it all back, or you got to suffer the consequences. And I had a professor in college who would tell us and remind us periodically, hey, listen, the most spiritual thing that some of you can do today is take a nap. Can I get an amen? All right, and if you're married and you have kids, you're going to have to like draw for it. I don't know how that's going to work out, but you can figure it out. So we're talking about exercise. I mean, take a walk, right? Watch what you eat. Get some fresh air. Don't stare at a screen all day. If we care for our bodies, we better care for our soul and for our mind. I actually, in spite of what I just said about loneliness, enjoy playing golf by myself from time to time. Like, I need to get away from people. And I can walk. I can listen to something. No one's bothering me or talking to me. I can take my time, go at my own pace. And when I'm caring for myself, and again, some of us probably need to learn the difference between self-care and self-medication. But when I'm caring for myself and I'm eating better, I feel better about everything. So after a snack and 2 naps, Elijah takes this 40-day walk, and he ends up on a mountain range that many scholars believe is the same mountain where Moses received the 10 Commandments. The same location where God spoke to Moses through a burning bush, and the place where God historically has spoken to people before, and now he wants to speak to Elijah. Now, he's still alone, and he's a little angry. You hear it in verse 10. He says, I've been very zealous for you, God, but the Israelites have abandoned your covenant. They tore down your altars. They killed the prophets. I alone am left, and now they're looking for me. They're going to take my life. Now, God's going to respond to him and say, okay, listen, what you need to do right now is to go out and stand in my presence and just listen. And they're going to have a conversation, okay, where God wants Elijah to see that there are some things that he is believing that are not true. They're actually false. Verse 11, so God says, okay, go out and stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence. And at that moment, the Lord passed by. A great and mighty wind was tearing at the mountains and shattering cliffs before the Lord, but the Lord wasn't in the wind. After the wind, there's an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there's a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was a voice, a soft whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, and he went out and he stood at the entrance of the cave. And then he heard this, what are you doing here, Elijah? Now, I just want to pause for a second, because instead of a loud, like demonstrative kind of a showing, you notice that when Elijah is at his lowest, God actually speaks the softest. But he's actually in a place where he can be real quiet and actually hear it. The devil, by the way, regardless of what you might think about him, I consider him to be a real being. The devil shouts, and he shouts lies. Like, he's using a speaker system. He's on the megaphone. He's just shouting it out all the time. And they are the lies that actually leave us overwhelmed in our life. Like, you're not good enough. You're not important enough. You don't matter. It's always going to be this way, or I'm alone. But God over here, he is whispering truth. So when you and I are experiencing depression, not only want to encourage us to say how we feel or to think about where we are, we also need to do this right here, is to hear the voice of God. Do you have a place where you can go to feel God's presence and hear his voice? For some of us, we go, man, it's a room like this one. Every time I come in here, God speaks to me. For others of us, it's at home, in the kitchen. We're worshiping alone. Do you have a Bible in one hand and a coffee mug in the other hand, right? Is it with friends? Is it serving other people? There's no place better than the ocean for me, right? I tell my wife all the time, like it's some major discovery, and she's like, that's not a thing. Hey, we're at the farthest eastern point of the United States. We can go no further east. And I'm amazed by this simple fact. And I just like, oh man, look at what God's done out here. It's just calming, it's soothing. It's just, I hear things better when I'm there. Or maybe for you, it's the mountains, right? Or it's on a bike ride, or sitting on the back porch, or I don't know what that place is, but everyone needs a place where we can go and get with God and listen for his voice, so that we can allow him to replace the lies that we tend to believe with his truth. See, God might speak to you in a moment of prayer. Right? He might speak to you through worship or when you're reading his scriptures, or sometimes he speaks through a friend, and he's more than capable, though, to actually just kind of drop a whisper into your heart or your mind, your ear, right? And in a time of peace and quiet, like, you can receive that personally. God speaks to Elijah in a whisper. And it's just hard for us, I mean, you already know this, to hear whispers from God when we're tired, when we're exhausted, when we have other noise in our life, and when there are competing voices. So, can I just tell you one more second here, that we can find truth and we can hear it from a lot of different sources. But it is the voice of God that is the only thing that we can rely on 100% of the time to always tell us the truth. Amen. And so you got to fill your hearts and your minds with all of his good stuff. Hey, what I listen to, what I read, what you watch, all that stuff impacts us. So we got to make sure that we got a diet of reading scripture, maybe even memorizing it. Lean on some other really good books. When I throw a resource out there, latch a hold of it, a podcast, something that magnifies Jesus, okay? And you watch that start to transform your thinking, because it allows us, you know, to kind of throw some light into some dark places in our soul. Pray, right? Not just once, but a life of prayer will lead to a life transformed. So hear the voice of God. Let it replace the lies we tend to believe with his truth. And now God asks the same question we just read, right? What are you doing here, Elijah? And you see his answer in verse 14. I've been very zealous. We already heard this. I've been zealous for God, for you. Okay, follow this. I've been very zealous for the Lord God of armies. That's true. The Israelites have abandoned your covenant. That's true. They tore down your altars. True. Killed your prophets with a sword. True. I alone am left. False. That's false. And sometimes when we're experiencing depression, our perspective is way off. He thinks he's by himself, and yet we're going to read here in just a second, there's actually thousands of people who are still left behind who are loyal to God. Hey, it becomes very, very easy to exaggerate a problem and let it grow bigger than it really is, right? To focus on the negative and to start letting our minds wander. Exaggeration, by the way, sounds like this. Hey, I'll never be. It'll always be this way. I'll never get better. I'm not. I'm the only one left. So let me just throw out this last thing, this fourth thing that I want to encourage us to do, and that is to see a positive perspective. Listen, all the research, go look it up, tells us if we can find a positive outlook on things, it actually acts as a protection against depression. Hey, even those of us who we've got the genes or the brain chemistry or life situations that put us at what we might consider to be risk for developing it, the opposite's also true, right? People who tend to think more negatively may be more at risk for developing depression. And we can't control a lot of the outcomes in our life, right? We can't control the things that contribute to that, but we do have control over how we see those situations and then how we actually move forward, which is why it's important, let me come back to it, to hear the truth from God. So let me try to wrap this up. All of the next steps today were in the body of the message. There's no next steps going forward, and there's not going to be a really nice bow on this, okay? So we okay with that? That's what's going to happen, yeah. One of the reasons God speaks to Elijah is to help him see the positive. But he also wants to task him, okay? Here's where we'll leave it off. He also wants to task him with something specific to do. And I want you to look at how the conversation ends, starting in 15. Then God says to him, okay, go and return by the way you came to the wilderness. Remember, that's where he left his guy behind. When you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and Elisha as a prophet in your place. And here's what we just mentioned. But I have 7,000 people in Israel, right? Their knees have not bowed to Baal, and their mouths have not kissed him. So I love how God is asking him to retrace his steps and go back to where he's supposed to be. And I picture God saying it this way. Okay, hey, I have more for you than this. And there's more for you than what you're currently experiencing. I have more for you than this. Listen, there's new kings for you to anoint. There's a new apprentice for you to train. And when you read the story, he does it, okay? He actually goes back down the mountain, walks back the way that he came, goes and begins a whole new chapter on this adventure with God, and he does it in the place where he was originally called to serve. So listen, when we're living in a place where we might feel like we're done with our life, it's easy to think that God might be done with our life too. But when you do some of these things here, okay, we say how we feel, we think why we might be here, we put ourselves in position to hear from God, and we can see maybe some positives here. I think hopefully we'll start to turn our thoughts towards saying, okay, yes, I'm down. I got some work to do. I'm down, but I'm not done. Okay? I am down, but I'm not done. Even if this thing I'm experiencing never goes away. Even if I never fully comprehend it or understand it completely. Listen, maybe you need to hear today that God is not disappointed in you. Like you haven't let him down, okay? He's not abandoned you. He's with you no matter what. And I think he still has amazing things for you to do. Amazing things for you to do. So we're going to respond in worship today like we always do. I'm going to baptize somebody. You're going to celebrate like you always do. So maybe you might want to just sit and pray during this song. I don't know. You might want to take communion, which you'll find in the back of the seat in front of you. Might be a moment for you just to kind of remind yourself, of what God has done for you and how he continues to shout out his love for you. Or you might actually stand and go, man, I want to worship. I'm going to give it my best. And I may not know the song or anything like that, but I want to be able to respond. And there's going to be a line in here that might just hit a little bit different today, where it says, we've seen mental health restored. And we're saying, I believe he can do it. He can do it. So God, today we just prayed. God, I know that as every week we talk about stuff and it just brings up things for all different ones of us. And so God, I know there's a lot of thoughts going on in the room. God, as we start to get real about maybe what we're experiencing or feeling, and God, I just pray for the courage, like all across the room, people watching online, just the courage to be able to say it, like to talk to a trusted friend, to get some help. God, I pray that we will find those times and moments and places to just be still before you, to have an experience with you where we can hear from you, to invite your truth to tell us who we are. God, what the situation really is, how you feel about us. God, what the future looks like, and let us counter all of the lies and the false things that we tend to hear and believe. God, help us look for some kind of a positive in this situation or in our life. And maybe, God, it will be just to continue to say thank you. God, just to be grateful for the things that you've given to us and what you've done in our life. And today, God, we just want to worship you. We love you. And we're going to pray these things in your name. Amen.